Hey everyone, welcome back. We're going deep today into Joe Dispenza, a topic I know you've been curious about with his approach to personal growth and all that spiritual stuff. And we're going to look at a conversation between two longtime Dispenza people, Bradley and Karina, see what we can learn from them. What's really cool about this conversation is that they go way beyond just those flashy testimonials you hear. They offer like a much more grounded and relatable perspective.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting how both of them, Bradley and Karina, were drawn to his work during some pretty tough times in their lives. Bradley was searching for ways to help his father, who was battling cancer, wanted something that kind of spoke to his dad's very analytical mind. And Karina was going through something really similar with her sister, who was also facing cancer and was yearning for that sense of hope and healing. So their stories really highlight how, personal crises can push us to seek new perspectives.
Absolutely. It makes me think about like your own journey and what sparked your interest in his work. What were you hoping to find? It's interesting because Bradley didn't consider himself a spiritual person at all.
Right.
But his father was an engineer, so he wanted something evidence-based. So they were drawn to Dispenza's work because it seemed to bridge that gap between science and spirituality.
Yeah, and that's what's so interesting about Dispenza. He often uses quantum physics to explain how our thoughts and emotions can impact our reality.
Oh.
Which can feel a little bit more tangible, right, for those who are scientifically minded.
Totally.
Like, for example, he talks about how focusing on a desired outcome as if it's already happening can actually change the energy in our bodies and influence the world around us.
Really?
Now, I know that might sound out there to some, but he backs it up with scientific studies and research, which, it can be pretty compelling.
It really makes you wonder. Now, what I found really impressive is that both Bradley and Karina have been following his teachings for over a decade.
Wow.
That's a serious commitment. That's not just a passing interest. What do you think it takes to stay engaged with a personal growth path for that long, especially when life, throws its inevitable curveballs at you?
Yeah. I think that's where their insights become super valuable because they talk about how personal growth isn't always this linear upward trajectory.
Right.
Bradley even compares it to a line graph with peaks and valleys representing his fluctuating levels of engagement over the years. So sometimes he was all in, attending retreats, meditating for hours, and then other times he'd fall back into old habits and routines. But what matters is that overall trend, the commitment to keep learning and growing even when it feels really challenging.
I love that analogy because it's so true. We put so much pressure on ourselves to be constantly evolving and improving, but life just isn't like that.
Right.
There can be times when we step back or we lose motivation or we just need a break.
Totally.
And that's okay.
Yeah, and Karina even talks about how she went too deep, at times almost losing herself in the process.
Oh, wow.
She emphasizes the importance of finding that balance, being mindful of how these practices are impacting us, and kind of adjusting our approach as needed. It's a reminder that personal growth shouldn't feel like a chore or a burden. It's about finding what works for us, honoring our own pace, and cultivating self-awareness along the way.
I love that it resonates with me a lot. It's interesting how the perception of his work has evolved over time.
Yeah.
They talk about how it was once considered pseudoscience by some people.
Right.
But now it's gaining more mainstream acceptance. What do you think has contributed to that shift?
Well, I think there are several factors at play. For one, there's a growing body of scientific research that supports the mind-body connection, right? Lending credibility to practices like meditation and mindfulness.
Yeah.
Secondly, there's this cultural shift happening with more and more people open to exploring alternative approaches to well-being.
Right.
And perhaps Dispenza's own ability to communicate these complex ideas in an accessible way has played a role as well. I mean, he doesn't shy away from scientific jargon.
Right.
But he also weaves in those personal anecdotes and examples that just make it easier to grasp.
Karina even goes as far as to say that Dispenza is writing history by bringing these ancient practices into a modern scientific context. It's like he's created a language that allows us to talk about these things in a way that resonates with both our logical and intuitive minds.
That's such a powerful statement because it suggests that he's not just repackaging old ideas.
Right.
He's bridging a gap between ancient wisdom and modern science, making these practices accessible to a much wider audience. But now, before we get too carried away with the hype,
Okay.
Karina brings up a really crucial question, one that I think you might be pondering as well.
Okay.
What are our expectations when approaching these practices, especially during times of need?
Ooh, that's a good one.
It makes you think about why you're drawn to this work in the first place.
Mhm.
I know you've been dealing with some challenges lately. Are you hoping for a quick fix?
Right.
Or are you more interested in that long-term transformative potential? Because it's easy to fall into that trap of thinking, if I just meditate enough or visualize my perfect outcome, everything will magically fall into place.
Totally.
But that's not always the reality, and if we cling to those expectations, we might end up feeling disappointed,
Yeah.
or even like a failure if things don't unfold exactly as we envisioned.
I think that's where the idea of surrendering to the present moment comes in.
Mm-hmm.
Bradley shares this really profound quote from Abraham Hicks. True progress happens when we find peace with our current state.
Wow.
Now, I don't know about you, but that idea both intrigues me and terrifies me a little bit.
I totally get that it's such a challenging concept because it requires us to let go of control, to accept what is, even if it's not what we want. But the more I reflect on it, the more I see its wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we're constantly striving for something different, always focused on what we lack, we're never truly present in our own lives.
Yeah.
And how can we experience joy or peace or even growth if we're always chasing after something else? That's such a good point. It's like we're saying, I'll be happy when, or I'll be successful when.
Yeah.
But what about finding contentment and even gratitude in the midst of our challenges?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not about becoming complacent or giving up on our dreams.
Right.
It's about shifting our perspective, finding the good in the present moment, and allowing ourselves to grow from a place of acceptance rather than resistance.
This reminds me of Bradley's story about feeling like he failed because he couldn't save his father.
Mm-hmm.
But over time, he realized that the journey had transformed him in these really profound ways. He didn't get the outcome that he wanted, but he found something even more valuable, a deeper understanding of himself, his purpose, and the interconnectedness of life.
That's a beautiful example of how personal growth often takes us on these unexpected detours.
Totally.
We might not always get what we think we want,
Right.
but we often receive what we truly need, and sometimes the most transformative experiences come from embracing those unexpected twists and turns.
Right.
So you've got this desire for personal growth. You're intrigued by Dispenza's work, and you're starting to see that it's not about quick fixes or achieving some idealized state of perfection. It's about this ongoing process of self-discovery, finding peace in the present moment, and maybe even embracing the woo-woo along the way.
Speaking of woo-woo, let's talk about how Bradley and Karina describe accessing a deeper awareness, a realm that exists beyond our everyday perception.
Okay.
To explain this, Bradley uses a brilliant analogy.
But I love this one.
He compares it to snorkeling.
I was going to say snorkeling.
Right.
Yeah.
It's such a vivid image. He talks about how when you're on the surface of the water, you only see a fraction of what's really there.
Right.
But the moment you dip your head beneath the surface, a whole new world opens up teeming with life and beauty.
Wow.
And he suggests that accessing this deeper awareness is similar. It's like diving beneath the surface of our conscious minds and exploring the vast interconnected world that exists just beyond our everyday perception.
Okay, I'm hooked, but how do we actually do that? Do we need to buy a snorkel and a wetsuit?
Well, maybe not a wetsuit,
Okay.
but both Bradley and Karina talk about the importance of quieting the mind as like that first step.
Okay.
And they each have their own unique ways of doing that.
Hold that thought.
Mm-hmm.
We'll dive into their meditation practices and explore those practical techniques right after this.
So we were talking about accessing deeper awareness, and Bradley was just about to share his snorkeling analogy.
Yeah, no actual snorkeling required though, right?
Yeah.
I was getting ready to grab my gear.
Not quite. It's more about diving into the depths of our own consciousness. So he describes it as, you know, you're on the surface of the water, you see the world as we normally do, but then when he dips his head below, even just a little bit, he enters this whole new world. It's teeming with life and beauty that he couldn't even perceive from above. And he uses this to illustrate how there's this whole other realm of awareness just waiting to be explored if we're willing to kind of dive beneath the surface of our everyday thoughts and perceptions.
I love that. That's such a cool way to think about it. Like, there's this hidden dimension all around us, and we're just oblivious to it.
Yeah.
Because we're so caught up in the surface level stuff. But Karina has a slightly different take on it, right?
Yeah, she brings up a really interesting point. She doesn't necessarily see it as a separate spiritual reality, but rather as aspects of ourselves that we've kind of shut off or forgotten how to access.
Okay.
She believes that we're all inherently connected to this deeper awareness, this field of consciousness, but we've been conditioned to prioritize our rational minds and our external experiences over our intuition and inner knowing.
So it's not about finding something out there, but rather rediscovering something within ourselves.
Exactly. And she suggests that practices like meditation can help us tap back into those innate capacities.
Okay, so let's talk about meditation. I know this is something you've explored quite a bit yourself. What resonates with you about Bradley and Karina's approach to meditation?
Well, what I appreciate is their honesty about the challenges. They don't sugarcoat it or pretend that it's always blissful and easy.
Right.
They talk about the distractions, the restlessness, the times when it feels like their mind is anything but still. And I think that's so important because so many people give up on meditation because they think they're doing it wrong.
Oh my gosh. Yes. You sit down all ready to zen out and your mind's like, let's make a grocery list and rehash that awkward conversation from last week and plan your entire wardrobe for the next decade. It's so frustrating.
Exactly. And that's where Karina's story is so encouraging because she talks about wanting to give up early on because she felt like she was doing it wrong. But a teacher encouraged her to just push through, and that's when she had her first experience of a truly calm and quiet mind.
That's huge. It's such a good reminder that it's a practice, not a destination. And sometimes we just need to be patient with ourselves and trust the process.
Totally. And both Bradley and Karina emphasize the importance of finding what works for you.
Yeah.
There's no one right way to meditate. Some people prefer guided meditations, others like to focus on their breath, and then still others find movement-based practices like walking or yoga to be more meditative.
Speaking of finding what works, you won't believe Bradley's meditation setup.
Ah, yes, his sensory deprivation chamber.
He goes all out noise-canceling headphones and eye mask. He even meditates in the shower because it's the only room in his house with a lock.
It just shows that you don't need a fancy meditation cushion or a retreat in the Himalayas to create a space for stillness. It's about being creative and finding what supports your practice.
I love that. And I love Karina's advice about approaching meditation with curiosity and openness.
Yeah.
Rather than like a rigid agenda.
Yeah.
It's not about forcing ourselves to achieve a certain state or empty our minds completely. It's about simply observing our thoughts and feelings without judgment and allowing ourselves to be present with whatever arises.
That's such a key insight. Meditation isn't about achieving some kind of blissful state or becoming a perfect meditator. It's about cultivating awareness, acceptance, and a deeper connection to ourselves. And sometimes the most profound insights come when we just let go of our expectations and allow the practice to unfold naturally.
Now, you mentioned that Bradley and Karina don't shy away from the woo-woo aspects of Dispenza's work. Can you give me an example of what you mean?
Well, Bradley shares this very personal story about an emotional breakthrough he had during a retreat.
Okay.
So he was meditating, and suddenly he was overwhelmed with this really intense feeling of love, so powerful that it brought him to tears. It was like a wave of pure, unconditional love just washing over him.
Wow, that sounds incredibly powerful. What do you think that experience signifies?
I think it points to the profound potential of these practices to open us up to a deeper level of connection, not just with ourselves, but with something much larger. And Karina connects this to the idea of the heart as the gateway to the spiritual world, urging us to explore the power of compassion and connection.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it, if we can access these states of love and connection through practices like meditation, what impact could that have on the world around us?
That's where it gets really fascinating because what's so remarkable is that scientific evidence is now starting to support this connection between heart-centered practices like meditation and real-world outcomes. Like, for example, studies have shown that group meditations can actually lead to a reduction in crime rates in a given area.
Wait, seriously, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So it's not just about personal transformation, it's about collective well-being as well.
Exactly. It's like these practices create ripple effects that extend beyond our individual lives, impacting our communities and even the world at large.
That is a really inspiring thought. It makes me think about how your own journey with these practices might be contributing to something much bigger than yourself.
It's a beautiful reminder that we're all interconnected and that our individual actions and choices can have a really profound impact on the collective.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've explored the idea of accessing a deeper awareness. We've delved into the challenges and rewards of meditation, and we've even touched on the potential for these practices to create positive change in the world. But there's one question that keeps popping up for me.
And what's that?
How do we reconcile the scientific with the spiritual? How do we navigate these seemingly contradictory realms? It feels like we need to find a way to integrate both the logical and the intuitive, the evidence-based and the experiential.
That's a great question, and it's one that I think many people struggle with. And I think Bradley and Karina offer some valuable insights into how to navigate that tension, and we'll explore their perspectives further when we return for the final part of our deep dive.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of Joe Dispenza. We've been exploring the experiences of Bradley and Karina, and wow, their insights are really making me think about this whole personal growth and spirituality thing differently. But like we were talking about before, that tension between the scientific and the spiritual keeps coming up. Like, how do we even make sense of that?
Yeah.
It's a question a lot of people struggle with, I think. And it's something that you've been kind of curious about too, right? Especially with your interest in understanding like how these practices actually work.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm drawn to like the idea of, tapping into a deeper awareness, creating positive change.
Yeah.
But I also want to make sure I'm not just getting caught up in wishful thinking.
Yeah.
How do we balance that desire for tangible results with the more intangible aspects of spirituality?
Well, I think Bradley and Karina offer a really helpful perspective on this. They don't see the scientific and the spiritual as like being at odds with each other. Instead, they seem to embrace both, recognizing that each offers a different lens through which to understand ourselves and the world around us.
So it's not about choosing one over the other,
Yeah.
but finding a way to integrate them.
Exactly like Bradley, for example. He initially sought out Dispenza's work because of that scientific basis. He was looking for something that could resonate with his very analytical mind and his father's logical way of thinking. But as he delved deeper into the practices, he started to have these really profound experiences that defied like rational explanation. Like being overwhelmed with this feeling of pure love during a retreat. And he realized that while science could provide like a framework for understanding these concepts, it was through direct experience that he truly grasped their power.
It reminds me of that saying, you can't learn to swim by reading a book. You have to get in the water and feel it for yourself.
Exactly. And Karina, who, as you recall, described this deeper awareness as aspects of ourselves that we shut off, she believes that we need to cultivate both our rational and our intuitive sides. She sees the heart as that gateway to this deeper awareness, emphasizing the power of compassion and connection.
It's so interesting because there's a growing body of scientific research that's starting to validate these ancient wisdom traditions. We talked earlier about how studies have shown that meditation can lead to a reduction in crime rates. And there's also research showing that meditation can reduce stress, improve focus, and even enhance empathy.
It is fascinating, right? It's like science is finally catching up with what spiritual traditions have known for centuries. And I think that convergence is really important because it offers this bridge between two worlds that have often been seen as separate. It gives people who are more scientifically minded a framework for understanding and accepting these practices.
And it makes me wonder if by embracing both the scientific and the spiritual, we might be able to unlock even greater potential within ourselves and create positive change in the world. Like, if these practices can have such a tangible impact on things like crime rates, imagine what else we could achieve if we collectively kind of shifted our consciousness.
It's a really powerful thought, and it brings us back to the question you raised earlier about how to balance that desire for tangible results with the more intangible aspects of spirituality. I think the key is to approach these practices with an open mind and a willingness to experiment. See what resonates with you, trust your intuition, and be patient with the process. Personal growth and spiritual development, they're not linear journeys. They're full of twists and turns and unexpected discoveries.
That's such a good reminder. It's not about striving for perfection or trying to force anything. It's about cultivating awareness, exploring different perspectives, and being open to the possibility that there's so much more to life than meets the eye.
Absolutely. And remember, you don't have to have all the answers or figure everything out right away. Just keep exploring, keep asking questions, and trust that you're exactly where you need to be on your journey.
I think that's a great note to end on. So as you continue to explore Joe Dispenza's work and delve deeper into the world of personal growth and spirituality, remember to stay curious, be open to new possibilities, and trust your own inner wisdom.
And who knows, maybe by quieting our minds, opening our hearts, and embracing the woo-woo, we might just create a world that's a little bit brighter, a little bit kinder, and a lot more connected.
I love that. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring.